I punched out your friend, and now it's time for you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, put me down. It's Rell, and let's dive into Kiborg Arena. Sobaka Studios' third-person arena roguelike beat-em-up. First, we'll talk about the story and the game's set dressing. Then we'll talk about the fast-paced action gameplay, and we'll finish it off with the game's core, upgrade systems. So why are we in this arena beating up heavily armed mutants and robots? For entertainment, of course. We are supposed to send clones of ourselves into the arena to put on a real spectacle. This blob of a guy is the announcer, and while I always appreciate the extra work put into voice acting, his comments got grating pretty quick. That being said, it's super easy to mute him. The arena clearly has some care put into it. The raving spectators, the not quite profane signs, advertisements, and the gong to start each wave really sell the dystopian arena setting. I love that during the early waves, dividers alter what part of the arena we have access to. The art on the enemies all stays within a very clear style, but is different enough to easily tell them apart. The coolest art choice is the player model, particularly when you get upgrades. Each one replaces a body part, turning into a cyborg. Side note, anyone else think that's where the name came from? Next, let's jump into the action. Enemies spawn in trying to wreck our day, and it's our job to wreck theirs first. To do this, we can use melee and ranged attacks. Our ranged weapons are relatively safe to use, but are limited by ammunition, which is restocked by melee attacking. It makes for a satisfying gameplay loop, encouraging using both systems. Melee combat consists of heavy and light attacks, which when using your fists, combine for combos. Your attacks have relatively high impacts, causing most single enemies to not be threatening. That being said, the game isn't a cakewalk. It compensates for your high power by providing lots of enemies, stagger-resistant ones, and bosses. The game has a decent variety of enemies, each providing their own challenge. Well, except for the guys that just miss the grenades and often hurt their friends. Shockers provide ranged threats, axe wielders attack through staggers. Even the basic enemies have a charging attack you have to pay attention to. On later waves, turrets will start spawning in, reducing the space you have to manage enemies. There are also arena hazards which can damage you, but can also be used to damage enemies. Every few waves you will fight a mini-boss, which have ways to damage you during your combos. But once you learn their patterns, they're manageable. Defeating them will grant an upgrade, and after, the next wave will be a cage fight. The second cage fight in particular was really fun. A good number of attacks, multiple phases, and a spikes effect that forces you to time your attacks. Figuring out his move pattern and planning your windows to deal damage is essential. Unfortunately, none of the other cage fights were engaging for me. I first tried all the others without learning their patterns. This could have been because I spent so much time learning the fundamentals on the second cage fight, because I had more upgrades, or because they were actually easier. I felt like the game faltered the further I made it. It stopped providing new enemies, and just started spawning in more per wave, but still at roughly the same pace. The waves really started to feel like a slog to get through. It felt like I wasn't making much progress or getting many upgrades. And this really went into overdrive after finishing the encounter map at the top. No ceremony or indication of progress for finishing. Just an even longer next wave. One thing I think they did really well on was including checkpoints. When you beat most cage fights, you will be able to start your future runs at the wave after that cage fight. The game even provides the upgrades you would have gotten had you completed the run up to that point. So, what are the upgrades? Let's get the melee weapons out of the way first. They're bad. Not completely unusable, but I always found myself switching back to my fists immediately. What about the ranged weapons? Most of them are significantly better. Early game, they provide a safe way to get some chip damage on the enemies, and as you get upgrades, you can specialize into guns to make them your primary weapon. Most of the gunslinger upgrades come from the gear, and boy is the gear good. As mentioned before, you replace parts of your body with cybernetics, upgrading your gunslinging, defenses, energy boost, and fisticuffs. These picks define how your arena match will go, but will reset each run, so feel free to experiment. The final major upgrade system is the passive tree. At the end of each round, you will earn currency to spend on permanent upgrades. Each point spent will increase the cost of future upgrades, so choose carefully. The upgrades include things like raw health, increased rarity on your other upgrades, unlocking special moves, and unlocking combos. I wish there was a way to test out the upgrades before taking them. I ended up trying out a bunch that I didn't end up liking, which led me to resetting my save so I could try out the others without a ton of grinding. The biggest issue with the upgrade systems is that your power scales faster than the enemies. I got to a point where waves were not dangerous, but were taking so long, I ended up just taking my hands off the keyboard so my run could end. I had an absolute blast learning this game and dispatching tons of enemies, but as I played it for longer, it got repetitive. I did get enough fun out of it that I'm happy I played it. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night.